Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Splice of Life Science Marketing. We're glad that you joined us again. Hi, Matt.
Hi Jasmine, how you doing?
Good, thanks. I thought that today we could talk about an event that we attended on October 21st and 22nd in Liverpool, which was the ELRIG Drug Discovery Conference. Do you want to share with everybody what we did there?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the Monday, actually on the 20th, there was a little training session for exhibitors, and so we were there training some exhibitors on AI and how to make more out of their budgets in 2025 and going into 2026. But the real reason that Jasmine flew over from the US to Liverpool, and then myself, Charlotte, and Lynn travelled up from the south of the country all the way up to Liverpool, was that we wanted to run a survey of exhibitors. And the reason for doing this was a couple of reasons. One, from a selfish reason, it's great to have great conversations with exhibitors and understand the challenges that they're currently facing. But when you're going around as a marketing consultant, those conversations can be a little bit salesy, or people assume you're trying to sell something. And so this was a real way of just trying to get a real pulse on the industry. And of course, there's been so many shocks across the sector, from funding cuts to people shifting where sites are being built, that it really makes sense to try and understand, well, what is going on in the industry. I think that probably one of the most profound parts of that survey was that the survey revealed that 61% of exhibitors struggle with lead quality, while only 14% actually have any kind of competitive battle cards ready to hand. So, Jasmine, I know you've been in charge of organisations where you've made sure that those are ready. So, why do you think there's such a massive preparation gap? And what should a good battle card actually contain for life science exhibitors?
Yeah, so by the way, I really, really enjoyed the discussions that we had with the exhibitors. It was everything from startups to large, well-established life science tools and reagents companies, a couple of automation companies, and some SaaS companies, software as a service companies. Learned tons from each one of these conversations that we couldn't have learned by doing an website search or an AI search. I think part of the problem is that while companies agree that trade shows are worthwhile attending, and companies spend thousands of dollars on booth space, on travel, on staffing, and so on, there's a little bit of rinse and repeat syndrome going on, where people have been to these conferences, whether it's ELRIG, whether it's Medica, you name your favorite conference, so many times that they're not stopping to think about, well, hold on a second. What's our strategy here? What do we want to achieve at this conference? And if they do stop to think about it, more often than not, it's number of leads. And we can go down the rabbit hole of, is it truly lead generation, or is it more buyer intent? And there's a nuance there that I don't think a lot of companies are having that discussion over. I think the other part of it is that there's no focus on what's differentiated, what's unique to us as a brand, what's unique to us about how we're solving customer pain points. And that kind of leads into competitors. There's a little bit of, I don't know if it's laziness or assuming we know all the competitors out there, and there's no thinking towards how can we be more quote unquote battle ready to talk about competition, and again come back to how we're differentiated based on what the customer is doing, and what their current challenges are. How do you see it, Matt?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that the data showed was that exhibitors are really acquisition focused. They really want to get new customers. They're really focused on that. But at the same time, they're differentiation poor. That to me is a real disconnect. We started asking exhibitors, what do you do to be memorable? And they really struggle to answer that question. There's really not a focus of standing out on a crowded show floor. How do you feel that commercial teams can move from just sort of collecting those leads through to actually standing out?
Yeah, I think it's really a discussion with the person who's coming up to your booth. It's not about just capturing or scanning their badge and making sure you understand whether they want a brochure or an application note. It's about the quality of that conversation and really digging into, what are they doing today to solve a current pain point? What are they happy with in how they're doing that today? What do they think that they could improve on and why? What are they using today? If they could dream in a budget unlimited world, what would they dream of having and a way of solving the problem that they have? And typically conversations don't go like that. It was astounding how many times people didn't even ask me, so what do you do? I mean, they didn't even ask whether I was in their market, which I clearly wasn't. It's this rush to just sort of capture that lead and be able to tick the box that I've fulfilled the goal. And by the way, where were all the marketers at this conference? I'd say the vast majority of people I spoke with were either field application scientists or salespeople. The product marketers, the marketing managers, I didn't speak to a one. What about yourself?
Yeah, I think between us, we spoke to more than 100 exhibitors, and the number of marketers were few and far between. And I think it was something similar we saw when we ran a similar survey at the American Chemical Society back in the summer, where there were very, very few marketing folks on the booth itself. And that really speaks to me sort of as a disconnect. It feels like marketing has been sort of pushed aside in some ways into sort of more of a coloring in department and delivery department, and a lot of that sort of the strategic stuff has moved into product and then to sort of sales and field application specialists. And I think there's been a real miss there, because the field application scientists are really there to be helpful and to know their subject, which is fantastic. Sales are obviously selling, but there's not necessarily anybody on the booth that's really tasked to kind of understand and get a sense of what's happening in the market. How do we make sure that we're positioning our brand and our plans for the next 3, 6, 9, 12, 36 months in context with what they're seeing out there? And I think that's something that's a real shame.
I completely agree. I mean, back in the day as a young marketer, that's how I cut my teeth. I went to the Human Genome Organization conference and the Human Proteome Organization conference. And while I could get decently technical, if I found that I was out of my depth, there was always an FAS there that I could call in to expand on the conversation. But there was huge value in understanding, in specific as well as in aggregate, what those conversations were like, what kind of questions we were being asked, and then reporting back in a debrief after the conversation, after the conference, and sharing that information with the next group of people who are going to the next conference. Word of mouth market intelligence is so critical and can't be replaced with website searches and just sitting in your office.
That's really important to note, I think, in that when you have those conversations, you really get to understand and feel the questions that customers and prospects are asking, both of the company itself, but also what the sales team are getting asked. And that can then provide such useful seed material for content, for how you market, for campaign ideas. And I feel that that's maybe something that is being lost right now in the way that some of these companies are being structured and the way they're sending people to shows.
I agree. I think the other thing is being lost is conferences are a superb place for competitor intelligence. This is a great place where you can, yes, of course, look at the features and benefits of different products, especially if there's been a new launch. But taking a beat and looking at the graphics of the booth, and what is the messaging? What are the conversations like in booth X versus booth Y versus your own booth? And collating that competitor intelligence and enriching battle cards. I mean, I think we talked at the very beginning of this show a little bit about battle cards, but maybe we should take a moment and describe what a battle card is. Do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, sure. At its core, a battle card is really an ability to provide sales or a customer facing member of the team with some key points about how your offer differentiates from others. Now, that may include technical spec comparisons. It may involve differences around the positioning, differences around the sort of offers that you provide. Software as a service companies do this really, really well. You will find on most SaaS companies' web pages, they'll have websites, they'll have at least one page where they show how they compare with each other. I recently had a look at comparing some different AI powered note takers and transcription powered software. And on all of them, there are direct head to head comparisons between the offer from company A and company B. And that means that then you can, as a customer, you can take a look and you can try and understand a little bit about, well, what makes more sense for me. We're not saying that we should necessarily have brochures that do that direct head to head, but I do think it's really important for the sales teams and customer facing members of the team to be able to understand, how do we stack up? Where if somebody asks about X, yeah, we can give them some answers, but actually really where we want to do is this, we want to guide them to the places where our value proposition is strongest. And if the match between our value proposition and their need meet, that's really where you hit the sweet spot.
Right. The other elements that I used to add in a battle card are, what's the pain point that this product addresses? How does the product as well as the company position itself relative to the competitors? And also there was a little section on, what questions should I ask? Not that the salesperson should be locked into those questions, but just to sort of remind them of a starting point that they can then personalize depending on the scenario. They're meant as sort of prep cards in the 10 or 15 minutes before you get to a particular client, and just a reminder of how you want the conversation to go and how you might want to react depending on what questions you get from that potential client. The other thing I was very surprised at is when we asked these exhibitors, if a client comes or a prospect comes up to you and asks, how do you compare to competitor ABC? More often than not, they kind of improvised on the fly. They didn't have anything in the booth, whether overtly or subtly showed a comparison to a competitor. What do you make of that?
I think that there's a couple of things there. One, maybe the people that we're speaking to, they're sending often field application specialists there, so they're not necessarily trained in sort of that competitive selling piece. But I just get the sense that competitor intel isn't centralized. It's probably held by product marketing as part of the product development and the briefs into marketing campaigns, and then it gets lost. And so I think that that's the big miss. I really wasn't expecting that generic talking points was going to be the biggest answer there. And I get the sense that there's a UK bias thing here, that we don't necessarily have the same advertising head-to-head campaigns that happen in the US. But I get the sense that there's a fear of saying the wrong thing. And so what people are trying to do is just to talk about their value and sort of almost ignore the rest of the competition. And in some ways, sometimes, life science offers do have elements of uniqueness. But even though the technical uniqueness is one thing, they may solve the same need as something else that does it in a different way. And I think that's where very often we miss out as marketers, in the fact that we're looking at, well, what makes this special versus actually what makes it special in use in my customer's hands. And that's the bit I think we really need to focus on.
I think there's also the wrapper of the customer experience uniqueness. What is it like to work with you, company A? Never mind about companies B and C, but that's your opportunity to show your pride at working at this company. The other thing that I've often found is helpful in training booth staff, which, by the way, I think that has stopped happening long ago, which is quite a shame. But when asked, how do you compare to competitor X, I used to think about the STAR model. STAR being situation assessment, asking the person who you're in front of, what are they currently using? What's working well for them? What's not working well? What's driving them to look for alternatives and so on? So that's the S. The T is targeted differentiation. So pick one or two things. It doesn't have to be a plethora of things. So no worries about forgetting stuff. One or two things that matter to the person in front of you's situation. A is acknowledge the competitor's strengths. You don't have to do competitor bashing. And R is reframe around your value, which is what you were talking about just now. Bring it back to what outcomes that particular client is trying to achieve and how your product and your company experience can help them. Have you used a similar model or something different?
I think I've used sort of similar models. I think that the big thing here is the fact that whatever model people are using, I don't think that they were really using that many models in their booth strategies. I think it was one of the things that was really sad to me was that it kind of felt that these organizations are pinning a lot of hope on it. And I think it's probably worth sort of talking a little bit about the economic side of things and the perspectives there. But people are pinning a lot of hope on, and a lot of the marketing budget on going to these trade shows, meeting new customers and prospects. And then they're there and they haven't necessarily optimized the way that they want to show up, the way they want to be memorable to customers and prospects, the whole processes that they go through. And they haven't necessarily even thought about their follow-up. And I think that's the real challenge. I don't necessarily know that the commercial team is necessarily conference ready. I don't think that they ask the question, what's memorable about your presence? Most of the time, the questions come back to it's either something about the product or it's about the people that they have on the booth. And both of those things are valid. But nobody said the one simple thing, that nobody had a clear articulation of a value proposition or something that would just make me go, this. And there was maybe one or two, that's maybe a bit harsh, but it was a real rarity to even see a really coherent answer around.
Yeah, so what do you think, if we could be in a position of giving some of these commercial teams some advice, what do you think they should change to weather through this sort of stuck in neutral economic sentiment?
Yeah, so I think it's worth saying when we asked about that, there was a lot of people that probably said that they were, we asked people to rate the economic environment on a scale of 1 to 5, and most people ended up putting it in a 3. And most people gave us very, very similar kind of prediction for the next 12 months as well. But both of those were based on hope. So I think that actually people were saying, this isn't great, but I suppose, somewhere between a 2 and a 3, and they'd opt for a 3. So I think that there was a level of not wanting to make things sound too difficult, challenging for the company. And then there was also that side of where people just really didn't feel that things can't get much worse. I think it was something that came up a few times. So I think that's a real shocker that then when we're spending money to go out and get in front of our desired audiences, we're not optimizing for it. So that to me is a real disconnect there. But I think one of the things that really strikes me is that if we've got these challenges, we've got economic headwinds due to, changes in geopolitics and changes in what's happening in AI and a whole range of things around that. I think we have to really guard against the pothole of we don't have a perfect answer to how to address these challenges. We have to start with experiments. But I think we first of all have to focus on, with all of those things. And if it's at a trade show, fantastic. But we have to focus on, out of all of the attendees, which companies do we want to target? And from those companies, what are our ideal customer personas that we're going to be talking to? So if we're getting ICPs and personas right, how do we then make sure that we're doing something that will be memorable for them, that attracts them? You've got to remember that we are a booth, no matter how big or small it is, we're situated amongst hundreds of others. And so we really need to do something that's memorable. We need to be able to take a bit of a risk to become memorable. And then we've got to look at how do we architect our offer to make sure that we're we're dragging people, into the booth, that we're having great conversations with them, and that we're really answering their needs. And one of the ways that I know that we've talked about a lot is being, really focusing on building out really, reliable ICPs and personas, and then being able to use AI to take that in and start being able to build synthetic customers where we can trial some ideas with, but also then being able to use that, along with our brand guidelines and maybe some of the claims matrices that we want to look at, and building out something that we've named Atlas, to be able to then become a content creation tool and a way of engaging with synthetic customers, so that we can actually go and say, we're going to ELRIG Drug Discovery, we're going to be targeting our pharmaceutical researchers in an early drug discovery. Build out my email campaigns, test my messaging on the booth, build out my follow-up that the sales team should be able to go through. And you're then able to be able to build out those pieces of content in really, really defined ways. Of course, we still want to make sure that we're testing and editing and doing that stuff right. But in terms of doing that sort of stuff, we can get to really, really focused communications that pick on personas' specific pain points in a really, really quick and easy way, that then allows us to then go and provide those tools to sales teams, so that we can follow up quickly and effectively with each of them. And if we then know, hey, I've got some great data about this person that came to the booth, this was the conversation we had, I can then use that to tailor those conversations really, really easily. And rather than just using a one-size-fits-all template that I just blast to everybody, I can actually talk to individuals, but understand a little bit more about the pain points that as a persona they're going to be talking about in general, as well as the specific conversation we had.
There's so much to talk about there. What really, really excites me about applying AI to persona work and to ICPs is this is the first time that marketers have an opportunity to engage in role playing. Usually role playing was left for sales, but this is the opportunity for marketers to role play with that persona AI that we call Atlas and say, okay, if you are this persona from this lab, how would you react to this message on the booth? If you wanted to see something bolder or more provocative, what would you suggest I say? If you're in the UK, what would you suggest I say? If you're in the US, what would you suggest I say? To your point of sort of different mindsets and different cultures. As you can tell, I get very animated when I think about Atlas and the use of AI in persona work, because this is the first time that marketers have had a companion. I don't think many are using it. And I'd really, really like to encourage our audience to help us with word of mouth marketing and get the word out there about Atlas and Persona AI and how it can be super helpful to your day to day and to leveling up that memorable experience at these conferences. I think the other area where people can do prep work before they get to the conference is really look at the attendee list, match the companies that are being represented by these attendees with your ICP, and reach out personally to those attendees that match your ICP to make an appointment ahead of time. Certainly look at the agenda when things are in session. You don't want to interfere with that, but really be proactive and don't just sort of spray and pray and send out a generic email 2 weeks before the conference, hey, we're going to be there. People want personalized messages, and do your homework. Again, AI can be a huge help there.
And I just call back to some of the conversation we had with Valentina some weeks ago, where go onto LinkedIn, look at those ICPs, make sure you're following the companies, make sure you're looking at the companies that will be saying things about their attendance as well. And so many of the exhibitors will be, and the visitors will be. Certainly those that are presenting posters will maybe talking or speaking will be promoting the fact that they're giving talks, and then reach out to them, make sure you're following their posts. And so you can really look at trying to be very targeted and use sort of that multi-channel discipline to really make sure you're trying to cast a bit of a net around the people that are going, to make sure that you're booking meetings with exactly the right people that you can find, and to make sure that you're not missing out on those opportunities.
So maybe we can wrap it up with this question. Looking at the data holistically, if you were advising a life science company who had a conference budget of $50,000 or £50,000, what would be your top 3 priorities to address the gaps that we've been talking about for their next major show?
So I think that there's definitely the first thing is, in amongst all of these other booths, there's a lot of noise. So you have to do something that really helps you stand out. And so I'd really want to lead with well-tested, simple, clear messaging. I'd want to make sure that we focus on the one single thing that we want people to remember us for after the show. And that's not necessarily having the best pick and mix, but it is, what does that then relate to? So it needs to be something that's simple, clear message. That doesn't want to be specs or instrument picks. It has to be something that both attracts people to the booth, draws them in, but it's also something that's really memorable. So I think the survey concludes with the best, most memorable execution is going to win. So I think that's the first thing. We need to make sure that we have something in the booth to really attract people. We have to attract people to come in and engage with us. Something that that can be meaningful as well. And I think that the third thing is really making sure that we have both marketing and sales in the booth. Sure, get field application specialists in there as well, but make sure that we've got marketing in there to really learn and understand, because they're going to then be able to help evolve the booth presence for the next shows. And so it's really important to make sure that we've got the whole commercial team represented, and that we've really got a good sense of understanding the customers that we want to attract, and really focusing in on making sure that we do something that's really, really memorable. After all, if you're exhibiting, you're one of, 160, 200 different exhibition booths. We got around most of them. And, it was sad to see how many weren't necessarily that memorable. And so making sure that your booth is really, really memorable, and you do something that is bold, brave, or as Mark Schaefer would say, audacious, let's make sure that we're doing that.
Yeah. What I would add to that is, please stop this rinse and repeat. Really take the time and do pre-show planning. Really think about how this conference matches your corporate strategy or your department strategy, and pick 2 things that you're going to do differently at that conference. The other aspect is post-show debriefing. What did we all learn? What can we share with the rest of our colleagues that will help them when they attend their next conference? Shamelessly pick something that you saw at another booth that you thought was really clever. How can we do something similar? So pre and post show planning is sort of on the top of my list of what I would recommend.
Now, I'd agree. Let's make sure that we really focus on the customer experience from pre to the end, and make sure that everything we do wraps up and focuses on our desired customers, and that we give them the best possible experience we can, and an experience that is really, really memorable.
This was a fun conversation. Thank you so much, Matt. On our next episode, we're going to talk about the second half of the survey, which is about AI adoption and AI insights that we gleaned from some of these exhibitors. So looking forward to seeing everybody again at A Splice of Life Science Marketing.
Thanks, Jasmine.
Thank you, Matt.